Hello, this is Digital Accessibility, the people behind the progress. I'm Joe Walensky, the creator and host of this series. And as an accessibility professional myself, I find it very interesting as to how others have found their way into this profession. So let's meet one of those people right now and hear about their journey. All right. Well, I'm Joe Walensky and ready for another episode where I have the great opportunity to talk with another accessibility professional. And today I'm very pleased to be speaking with Mike Paciello. Hello, Mike. How are you today?
Hey, Joe. Great. Good to be with you.
Well, I'm speaking from my home office on Vashon Island, which is near Blink's Seattle, Washington headquarters. Where are you talking to us from?
I'm just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. I'm in a little town called Brevard. It's about 4 or 5 hours away from Raleigh-Durham, for those people that know that area, the triangle area, technology triangle area. Literally just moved here about a month ago.
All right. Well, I've been in that area. It's a really beautiful area to visit, and I've known of you for a long time and of your work. But this is the first time that I think we've had the chance to meet face to face. So this is great for me as well. But for people that may not be familiar with you and your work, maybe you could talk about some of the things that you're currently involved in, and then we could go back and look at some of the other stuff.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So right now I work with Pearson, who's a UK-based company that focuses primarily on education and publishing. They're well known in the industry. I came here literally about 3 or 4 months ago in July. And my focus right now is building in the accessibility area, building a stronger leadership presence for Pearson and disabilities and technology.
And so for what is kind of a day in the life or a week in the life for the things that you're involved with now? Are there any common themes, or is just a lot of different things all the time?
Yeah, well, really, I've been very blessed, if you will, to be involved right out of the box with some very cool technologies. Most of my work is primarily from the advocacy and business side of the business. But right now I'm working on three key areas, at least three that I could think of. One is on the new electronic braille standards that are actually being devised and authored by the DAISY Consortium, the American Printing House of the Blind, and a number of partners, National Braille Press, the National Federation for the Blind here in the United States, who are focused on building this new electronic braille standard. And I have been working with the standards team there on that activity. So that's pretty cool stuff. In fact, I just came out of a meeting with some reps from BANA, the Braille Authority for the National Braille Authority for the blind. So I'm looking forward to getting involved there. Electronic Braille is a brand new thing, right? So it's an interesting type technology. I've also been involved in or with the International Association for Accessibility Professionals, or IAAP, and specifically working with them on establishing or creating maturity models. So I know that you recently had talked with Sarah Horton, and Sarah and I go back a long way. And my first introduction to maturity models was with Sarah and David Sloan. And so this gives me an opportunity now to work along or in behalf of Pearson in creating maturity models, business maturity models that embrace a holistic approach to disabilities and accessibilities, where across the board accommodations are concerned, and building a culture that is inclusive. Right, so we've got the whole DE&I movement that's very popular amongst corporations today. Maturity models will be the strategies to execute on in making DE&I, I think, the value add that companies envision. So that's the second area that I'm on. The third area is actually a very cool area, and I kind of fell into this by accident, but it involves immersive interfaces, or the metaverse, and extended reality. in looking at how we can develop applications, we being Pearson, can develop applications geared towards students in education and people with disabilities, and using immersive environments for that. So those are the three key projects I'm working on right now. Very excited about it, and have gotten nothing but support and good stuff from the folks at Pearson and management there.
Well, it looks like you certainly have your hands full and plenty of things to be busy about. And I also have, I think I have a couple of follow-ups about some of those items you mentioned. But one of the things I like to do with this program is to find out how people found their way into this space, and it's not necessarily something that many people take on as maybe foundational university education, although that's changing now. But what was it for you where you first became aware of accessibility in your lived life or work life, and then how did that start to evolve into a professional interest?
Yeah, thank you. It's unfortunately it's long ago and far away, and so longer than I want to talk about, but close to 40 years now. I was introduced. I was actually working as a technical writer for a computer company that no longer exists today, Digital Equipment Corporation. But at that time, they were the second or third largest computer company in the world, behind IBM. And I was working as a technical writer for digital. A manager happened to have this project where apparently digital had a relationship with the National Braille Press out of Boston, where they would request now and then some of our computer documentation. And we would just bring the hard copy publications to their offices, and then they would convert that to Braille. I went down there after volunteering to take part of this project. And I met the director then, who was Bill Reeder. And Bill said, "Hey, let me give you a tour. Let me show you what we're doing." So I literally watched what I thought was, and I still think it is today, the painstaking process of building Braille from a print document. And I had already been working in the electronic documentation field using markup languages, which at that time were invented by Charles Goldfarb when he was at IBM. The first versions of it came out in something he called GenCode. Then it became the standard generalized markup language, which, as we all know today, is the precursor to HTML, and now we have the web, right? But it was markup languages and publishing that really drew me into trying to look for a solution to make the Braille publishing process easier from a single source file. So I took that, went back and said, hey, well, if we could convert electronic documents for various printer types in PostScript, why not try to create it in Braille or large text or voice-ready files? So long story short, started to do some research, reached out, attended a few conferences, aligned myself with some great people like George Kirscher, who's now with the DAISY Consortium. And we formed an international working group that created the first document type definition for creating files, electronic files that could be converted to Braille, large text, and voice-ready files, and became an American Association of Publishers standard for producing Braille. That was back in the early to mid 80s when I first got started.
Well, it's very interesting to hear your story about that. And in fact, I did some technical writing for digital equipment back in the early mid 80s as well, and did some consulting work in the Boston area. But yeah, it was interesting to hear about that, and also that where you got involved was working with this technology aspect early on. Most of the people I talk to tends to come more from having done web development work or something like that, and then accessibility was an issue. But coming in from that technology area, and specifically with Braille, then kind of what was the next step after that in your journey into well, you probably weren't even thinking about it as accessibility at the time.
Oh no, we absolutely were. I really quickly graduated from being a technical writer to moving into the usability profession. And so I saw a marriage right there, a very strong marriage between usability and making things accessible to people with disabilities, right? So we talked about making them documentation accessible to people with print disabilities. That's really how the way we described it, because we found out very early on it wasn't just the blind or individuals with visual impairments that could not have easy access, right, to documentation, but it included individuals, for example, who were wheelchair bound, right? Quads and perhaps paralytics, individuals born without limbs or without limbs, so they couldn't turn pages or easily read. There was just no easy reading mechanism for them, or individuals with LD and dyslexic. So the term accessibility, I don't remember exactly when we coined that phrase or when that became popular, but it was certainly around that time. But again, working in a computer company, a large computer company that had more than one area of expertise, hardware and software, I really decided I wanted to move into the software field. And a lot of that was because of the usability studies that I was part of. One of the first usability studies that I participated in is with an icon in the usability world, Chauncey Wilson, and we were doing user studies around the first instances of Dragon naturally speaking, so voice I/O interfaces. So I really thought that was very cool. But it led me to looking at software and how usable and accessible it was to individuals with disabilities. Now we're talking about all disabilities. We're not just talking about the blind and low vision. We're talking about the deaf. We're talking about individuals with cognitive disabilities and mobility disabilities all the way across the board, because anyone that interacts with a computer interface and has a disability, it was going to be challenging. So I moved from technical writing to usability and accessibility, started dabbling with that, leading some efforts at digital. Eventually, that led to working with MIT as a volunteer when the World Wide Web Consortium had just been formed. And they moved its base. Tim Berners-Lee came over to MIT with a number of well-known internet folks and web folks at that particular time. And I just started doing some volunteer work there to kind of promote the notion of how important, how critical it was to make this thing we called the web, which was then primarily text on a page, easy to render until the Mosaic browser got developed, right? Shortly followed after that by the Netscape browser from there. So now we've got graphics. We were already working with X Windows, which was a graphical user interface. So that whole thing just created this snowball, an avalanche of opportunity to increase awareness around accessibility for people with disabilities. So I dove into that. Eventually, that led to me having the privilege of working with folks at MIT, and we created the Web Accessibility Initiative, which, as you know, is functionally the where all the world is today, where accessibility in the web is concerned, is centered right there at the way.
And so this is another area where we could have possibly crossed paths in accessibility, because I was a member of the W3C in the late 90s. And as a member, you get assigned to working groups. And I happened to get assigned to work on that web accessibility initiative, doing some technical writing work.
Yep.
On some of the documentation, and kind of had some guidance from Judy Brewer, but that was my first experience with that at all. So it was kind of serendipitous, and I found that I enjoyed it a lot and continued on from there. So yeah, it's interesting to hear about that. And so what then did the work with W3C lead into other things for you, or were you already pursuing other aspects of business with accessibility?
Yeah, once we got the way launched, that was really my charter. At that particular time, I was actually the director of a foundation, the Yuri Vinsky Insight Foundation. So the way was created, and now I'm thinking, okay, we've got web, and that's sorted out. We've got some good leadership there, and the guidelines, the first version, were already pretty much getting close to being published. I want to go into software, period. I want to go into web apps, web software, because I figured that's where the opportunity would be from there. So I created the TPG, the Paciello Group, in 2002. And my goal there was to create a world-class professional services organization built upon a foundation of some of the best people in the world that I already knew, that were already colleagues that I was, that I was working with subcontractually and certainly within circles, and to build that company, which is exactly what we did. We launched it in 2002, and long story short, brought on some of the great folks like Steve Faulkner and Leonie Watson and Jez Lemon and Sarah Horton and David Sloan. I mean, there's a Hans Hillen. We just had. I always tell people they don't necessarily believe me, but I got really lucky that I was able to create the start of a company that just happened to have my name, and that was accidental too. It wasn't supposed to be called TPG. It was supposed to be called something else, but in the end, it just didn't work out. So we went with the only thing we had was my name. But to bring in all of these great people, Ian Pouncey, right? Carl Groves worked with me. Adrian Roselli worked for us. I mean, we just had all these great people. They were all just friends of mine. And said, hey, you want to come and join us? We're going to work and help us. Let's make the world better, right? And let's do it. And we did. We did. I think to this day, it'll be really hard pressed for me to ever be involved with an organization of people and colleagues and friends, and to create something I think was just an absolute joy of mine today that I have. So there sort of was. I created TPG, created that agent. We sold it to Vispero, who now, of course, they've got Freedom Scientific and AI Squared and Optelec and a few other acquisitions that they made. And so TPGI is a key and core component of that organization now.
Well, I'm definitely not going to let it go with digging in more to TPG, because that's probably where a phrase a lot of people in accessibility are aware of, even if they hadn't had a chance to connect it with you individually. But I mean, it's great to hear about what a good experience that was for you in terms of your team. It also, I think, was a time where a lot of other contemporary organizations were starting to form for that same kind of purpose, which to me always becomes an inflection point when there's enough going on that then businesses like yours can be formed that can then kind of move things to a more professional level. So I imagine there were a lot of fits and starts to building something like that up, but it was probably also exciting and innovative time to be doing that.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, we had, like any company, we had our ups and downs. But as a start and as a startup, but we managed ourselves really well. In the entire history of that company, we only had 1 month where we weren't sure we were going to make payroll, and we figured our way out of that, and that was it. So, but that was because the folks that were around me, the Deb Rapses of the world, and she'll probably be mad if she hears me say her name, but and the other managers around me were very smart. We were very focused on sales and how we made that happen. We managed our growth, and that kept us put us in a good position to make a difference and accomplish the good that I think that we did as a company, and they still are today.
Well, I imagine that as it evolved, you were also identifying that there's a consultancy portion, but then there's the maybe opportunity and need to come up with tools and processes that can be part of that and that you bring to organizations. So what was that evolution like, kind of identifying what things were going to be useful to your clients as you moved along?
Yeah, well, so we created maturity models and usability testing models where accessibility was integrated in that. That part of the professional services actually came naturally for all of us. We had the best consultants in the world. Everyone on our team knew exactly what they were doing, how to help our clients, make their products, their software, web or otherwise, regardless of the platform, usable and accessible. However, you did hit on a point that we, around 2016, 2015, 2016, we knew that we wanted to grow. We wanted to grow in turn what we were doing into some products in tools. It was interesting because when I started TPG, we started out as a professional services organization. But the other companies are competitors. I kind of call them colleagues of the field. The high software back then, level access, which was I already forgot what their name was before they were Level Access. But Level Access and Tim Springer and his company, Mary Jones was there, Mary Smith was there at that particular time. DQ, so Pretty was there. So those companies actually started with products, right? They were part of the age of building automated validation tools, which was pretty interesting because people really were not sure those automated tools were as good as their founders wanted them to be, and to this day, that's still a challenge, what they can actually do in terms of providing, real, full, wholehearted validation around, a digital asset. But that having been said, they started with the products. TPG really was a services organization. So we were kind of, eventually all of those organizations adopted a professional services model too, because it's really hard to work one without the other. So around 2015, 2016, we started thinking, well, maybe it's time that we started to develop some tools. We used a lot that were out there. We had already developed our color contrast analyzer, really, which was developed by Jez Lemon, and that eventually became, known as a TPG tool. We had a couple of other things that we were using, but that takes money, takes investment. And so that's what led to some discussions with some of our other partners in the field. And long story short, that ended us having discussions with Vispero, who that time was being led by their venture capital or private investor firm. And we thought, here's an opportunity to take the best, what we thought, the best professional services organization, and marry it with the company that had the largest selling screen reader in the world, JAWS, right, through Freedom, the largest selling screen magnifier with AI Squared's a ZoomText product, one of the largest, if not the largest, CCTV manufacturers in Optelec. Pull all of that together. Now you've got not just a services engine that's got brand name recognition, but you've got some of the best technologies in the world, and you can build around that and support it and then branch it from there. And so it really seemed like at that time, the best of both worlds. And that's why we went there. And from there, then we could grow and build our own validation services, which TPG has done. And they've built some of the JAWS add-ons that have gone there to make testing for screen readers and JAWS and the kiosk software that they've got there. So yeah, it seemed like a natural fit, and that's where we went.
Well, you've certainly had this extensive experience, as you mentioned. Some 40 years of being involved in this. For me, it's not as long, but it's been like 24 years for me. And if I think back to where I was in 1998, I kind of would have thought that we would have been a little further along in terms of broadly based accessibility in digital products and services at the time looking forward. But then again, as I look backward, and I've mentioned this many times, I'm also amazed at what technologies have done to be able to facilitate some enormous changes. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts along those lines, and maybe things where there's maybe an opportunity missed, or one that we haven't embraced enough, or things that you might think that we have to, as a profession, be thinking about moving into the future.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I couldn't agree with you more. I thought things would happen a lot faster than they are, right? Um, I have been privileged to be involved in an awful lot of international and national standards bodies, international and national government policy organizations. I had the privilege of working along with my good friend who just passed away earlier this year, Jim Tobias, in co-chairing the Section 508 committee over here in the United States. And we really, I thought, made great progress there. But here's the fundamental truth. And a friend of mine always told me this: if you want to create a great business and be an earth mover, so to speak, right? You need one of two things. You either need laws that enforce it, that you could create business around it, or you need to come up with just this outstanding invention of some sort that just, right? So the internet, thank Vint Cerf, and then the web for Tim Berners-Lee for coming up with those kind of groundbreaking inventions, if you will, that have changed our lives, right? One of the things that I really am still disappointed in is that in the 40 years, I thought by now, organizations, for profit or nonprofit, would have adopted cultures that would create what I often used to call the accessibility mindset. And that is, they design and develop things that are all out of the box, usable and accessible to people with disabilities. That we shouldn't have to use sticks and laws to force them to do things anymore. Laws are always a great way to kind of get people going and get things, the springboard type of effect. But they're there just to get things started. In the long run, you operate by principles, right? And when you design and develop user-centered design, and you design and develop inclusively, well, those embrace principles. Those just say, what do I need to do to enhance what I'm developing so that it's usable and accessible to the blind, to the deaf, to those with mobility disabilities, to those with cognitive disabilities, to those with fine motor control disabilities. How do I do that? What do I do? And that gets built into the life cycle, the engineering life cycle. I do tend to talk more in technology terms because that's just my life. But the reality is you can apply that across the board, regardless of what you invent or what you develop, right? And I had hoped by now that this would be integral. It would be cultural to every organization, and it's not. We still, in this country here, we live by lawsuits and litigation, right? And that moves the proverbial elephants to get going. Well, that's just not right. We shouldn't have to sue a company, right, to force them to do something that they could and should and have the ability to do on their own. So that's one thing I think I'm disappointed in. I'm not saying that it's, there are no absolutes. So there are some organizations, there are some companies that are setting good examples in leadership at that level. But it's definitely not something that is embraced holistically. So at my age, at this point, 40 years of the business, I feel like the one thing that I could still push and do is push that mindset and this is why I was talking about earlier, working with the IAAP in working on building maturity models, because these maturity models are something that companies get, that they embrace in other areas of their business, okay, that they use, that they execute and strategize on. But building an accessibility maturity model, well, that takes it to a whole new level, right? If companies would live by those maturity models, if they would operate and work by and adopt them, then I believe within a couple of years, those companies would be thinking, oh, accessibility? Yeah, that's what we just do it. I don't have to think about it. It's just done because it's a part of our processes all the way across the board, the engineering life cycle. It's at marketing and concept, and it's out sales, and everybody knows about it. So I'm going to spend the last few years, whatever part of my life I have, pushing that model, pushing that, and then pushing that into some of the emerging technologies. I still don't understand why, after all these years of working first with operating systems, then with application layers like the web, right, that we still have to talk to people about, hey, you got to think about disabilities and accessibility when you develop an immersive environment or you're building your gaming environment. But we do. We have to keep, there's so many friends and colleagues out there. You see them, they're spending, oodles of time teaching, building awareness, whole conferences and whole events to do that. But sometimes if you feel like you're pushing a rope.
No, I appreciate all your thoughtful comments and insights on that, and I couldn't agree more. I've experienced a lot of the same in my career along these lines, and then you started to allude to the future. I was going to ask a little bit about the IAAP, but you mentioned some things about that. But what are the things looking forward for you that you're any things you're excited about getting involved in, or new activities or goals for this part of your career?
Yeah, well, I actually am seriously thinking it'll be already 25 years since I wrote my first book, Web Accessibility for People with Disabilities. And I'm actually thinking about writing a second version. So there's one kind of aspiration. I also want to write a novel, but that's just a side goal. So that's one thing I'm thinking about doing. Being with Pearson as a publishing company gives me, maybe a leg up on doing that. So we'll see. I really am very excited about being part of the 3 projects that I already told you about up front. I'm enamored with the electronic braille standard and what that has the potential to become in the future for blind users. So being part of that and looking at how that works and then where that takes us into the device and digital world, really, really interesting. Tactile graphics, another big part of that, and turning that into a mature area of technology, which right now today it really is still something that needs to be worked with. So there's one area. I'm really excited about the work in immersive environments, right? So whether it's augmentative reality or mixed reality or virtual reality, and integrating those into the lives of people with disabilities. We've seen some applications, especially around devices, that have been very useful, even in the medical field. But I really want to integrate, I really want to find some solutions that will allow us to integrate into the education space. How can we get young people to use these devices, young kids with disabilities, and let them become learning tools? As well as the instructors, the professors, the teachers, et cetera. And so I see the whole XR community being very, very exciting future. One of my favorite experiences is I had the opportunity to work with Jaron Lanier several years ago when he ran and started VPL, and everybody and their mother wanted to meet him. He had an employee that had MS, and he was really concerned about his ability to be able to use virtual reality. And so I got to work with him, some others at the National Institute of Standards that were working on that. Sandy Ressler, I'm thinking about Sandy. So I just think that there's a huge area out there that we could work with. And I want to get accessibility built into that now before it becomes what we're looking back at, operating systems still having to work on them, web still having to work on them. Let's get it out the door and get it usable and accessible without any hitches.
Well, I'm excited about the opportunities there as well, and I'm keeping up on developments there. But Mike, it's been a pleasure to have this opportunity to meet you for the first time like this, and to have this engaging chat. And hopefully, we can meet at some physical event sometime in the future.
That would be great, Joe. Thanks very much. I really appreciate having me on your show.
All right, thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Take care.
Hey, we did it.
Yeah, I'm not
Perfect.
watching.